There is a secret buried in thousand-year-old bones that will change everything you think you know about building real strength. And when scientists finally measured it, what they found did not just challenge modern training methods, it completely shattered them. Because here is what happened. Researchers studying Viking skeletal remains expected to find evidence of hard lives and broken bodies, the kind of wear and tear that comes from brutal manual labor and constant warfare. Instead, they discovered something that made absolutely no sense, according to everything we understand about modern strength training. These men, who never touched a barbell, never counted a macro, never took a single supplement, had bone density and muscle attachment sites that rival modern-day strongmen, who have spent decades optimizing every variable we are told matters, including training splits, progressive overload, protein timing, and recovery protocols. And that discovery raises a question so uncomfortable that most fitness experts would rather ignore it entirely. What if everything we have been taught about building strength is fundamentally backwards? What if the supplements, the tracking, the perfectly structured programs, and the obsession with optimization are not making us stronger, but actually keeping us from reaching the kind of resilient, unbreakable strength that used to be the default setting for human beings? There was a time when men built a completely different kind of strength, the kind that lasted not for a training cycle, but for an entire lifetime. And we are going to reverse engineer exactly how they did it. So hit that subscribe button and settle in, because by the end of this, you might realize you are not weak at all. You are just being measured against the wrong standard and training for the wrong outcome. To truly understand Viking strength, you have to first understand the environment that demanded it, because strength does not emerge in a vacuum. It is always a response to pressure. And the pressure these men faced was relentless in ways that modern life has systematically eliminated. A Viking man did not wake up and decide to train, did not block out an hour for exercise, did not follow a periodized program with strategic deload weeks built in for recovery. They lived in ways that demanded extreme physical efforts all day, every day. Strength was not a hobby he pursued for personal development or aesthetic goals. It was quite literally the cost of staying alive in a world that killed the weak without mercy or second chances. This was messy, awkward, functional strength, forged from lifting uneven loads that shifted unpredictably, maintaining balance on unstable footing that changed with every step, and applying force against resistance that fought back in ways no machine could ever replicate. Full body movement was constant, and that demanded high output and forced continuous adaptation to whatever challenge presented itself, whether you were ready for it or not, whether you had eaten enough or slept well or felt recovered from yesterday's work. Vikings trained movement, endurance, and constant readiness without ever thinking about it, because it was not training at all. It was simply life, and life does not wait for you to be ready. So when we examine their skeletal remains centuries later and still see undeniable evidence of extraordinary strength, bone density that should not exist in men that size, muscle attachment points that dwarf what we would expect, and stress markers that tell stories of decades spent under tremendous physical load, it makes perfect sense. But what did that kind of daily physical demand actually do to the human body at a measurable biological level? And how do we know for certain that this approach actually worked or better than what we are doing now? That is where the science gets really interesting, and where modern assumptions start to crumble. Strength leaves a permanent mark on the human skeleton that persists long after the muscles have decayed, and that mark tells a story that numbers in a gym logbook never could. In 2012, a team of archaeologists studying Viking burial sites across Scandinavia noticed something that did not align with their expectations or with conventional understanding of how bodies develop in response to physical stress. These men whose remains they were examining were not particularly tall. Most stood somewhere between 5 feet 7 inches and 5 feet 9 inches, which is actually below average height even by medieval standards. They were not heavy either. Skeletal analysis suggests living weights of roughly 170 to 190 pounds, lean by modern standards and nowhere near the mass we associate with serious strength. But their bones told a radically different story that contradicted everything their size suggested. Their femurs, the large bones in the thighs, were unusually thick and remarkably dense, showing structural characteristics much closer to what you would find in modern competitive athletes or lifelong manual laborers who had spent decades performing heavy physical work. Their shoulder girdles and forearms displayed dramatically oversized muscle attachment points, the places where tendons connect muscle to bone, which had been enlarged through years of constant pulling, lifting, swinging, and gripping forces that literally reshaped the bone structure over time. Deep stress markers lined their spines and major joints, wear patterns entirely consistent with daily, full-body effort maintained across decades. The kind of cumulative loading that modern training rarely approaches because we are always cycling between work and rest, push and recovery. And here is what made this discovery even more significant. This was not just found in one elite warrior who might have been genetically exceptional or who had access to better nutrition and training. This was common across the samples, appearing in remains from different regions, different social classes, and different time periods throughout the Viking Age. The science was unambiguous. Their bodies had undergone profound adaptation to constant, high-load functional strain that engaged the entire musculoskeletal system day after day, without the luxury of recovery weeks or strategic deloads. This was not achieved through a carefully designed program with progressive overload tracked in a spreadsheet. It came through decades of environmental demand that simply did not give them a choice about whether to show up strong. Which raises the obvious next question we need to answer before we can learn anything useful from this: if their strength came from simply living rather than from dedicated training. What exactly did that day-to-day existence actually look like in practical terms? Before the sun fully rose, while most of us today are still hitting snooze on our alarms, a Viking man might already have rowed several miles across rough water to reach fishing grounds, travel to the next settlement, or check traps he had set the previous day. That same afternoon, with no recovery period and no protein shake in between, he would chop enough wood to keep fires burning through the night. He would repair tools and weapons damaged in use because there was no hardware store to buy replacements. He would carry heavy gear across uneven terrain, lift and stack stones for building or boundary markers, and drag a hunted animal that might weigh nearly as much as he did back to camp or to the village. Combat training included wrestling matches and weapon drills woven directly into daily life and social interaction. Violence could erupt without warning, and the difference between competence and incompetence with a blade was literally the difference between living and dying. Their wooden practice swords used for training were deliberately made heavier than the actual weapons they would carry into real combat. That way, when a real blade was finally in their hands during a fight, it felt light, responsive, and easy to control, giving them an advantage when fractions of a second determined outcomes. They moved awkward loads that shifted unpredictably and required constant adjustment. They gripped thick ropes that tore at their hands until calluses formed like natural gloves. They climbed unstable surfaces where a wrong movement could mean a serious fall. The body did not have the luxury of choosing which adaptations to make. It simply had to become capable of handling whatever was demanded of it, or the consequences would be swift and severe. The Viking trained his entire body as a single integrated unit every single day, not because he understood the theoretical benefits of full-body training or because some expert told him it was optimal, but because that is simply how the human body has to function when performing any real-world task that actually matters. But here is the part that nobody wants to hear: the inconvenient truth that undermines entire industries built on telling you what to buy and how to eat. You absolutely cannot do all of that intense physical work without adequate fuel to support it. And what the Vikings actually ate to fuel that level of output might be the most surprising part of this entire story. Vikings ate to function, pure and simple. They consumed whatever food their environment provided in whatever quantities were available. And somehow that unsophisticated approach supported strength development that modern nutritional science still struggles to fully explain. Their diet was completely seasonal, shifting dramatically with the time of year and what could be harvested or hunted or preserved. It was entirely local because global supply chains did not exist, and importing exotic foods was impossible for all but the wealthiest. It was also absolutely unprocessed in ways that our modern food system has made almost impossible to replicate. Fatty fish like herring and salmon, barley and oats cooked into thick porridge that provided sustained energy, or ground and baked into dense flatbread that could be carried on long journeys. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots, wild greens gathered from forests and fields during brief growing seasons. Fermented dairy products like skaya that provided protein and probiotics. And when it was available, which was not nearly as often as you might assume, meat from wild game they had hunted or livestock they had raised. But here is what almost everyone gets wrong about Viking nutrition. Meat was not the centerpiece of their diet, and it was not consumed at every meal. It was occasional rather than daily, valued when available, but not considered absolutely necessary for maintaining their impressive physical capabilities. Most of their actual energy, the fuel that powered those hours of rowing and hauling and fighting, came from carbohydrates and healthy fats, not from the endless protein shakes and chicken breast and red meat that modern fitness culture treats as non-negotiable requirements for building or maintaining muscle mass. The Vikings ate simply, without variety or excitement or optimization. But they ate consistently, and they ate real food that came from sources they could see and understand. So if they were not tracking every meal or timing their post-workout nutrition windows or consuming supplements to fill nutritional gaps, if they were working harder physically than most of us can even imagine, while eating a diet that would be considered inadequate by modern standards, how in the world did they recover from that level of daily physical stress? That's where the real magic happened, in the space between effort and effort, and it is where we have perhaps made our biggest mistakes in trying to engineer better performance. Modern recovery has become an industry unto itself, loud and expensive and increasingly complex, promising better results through smarter technology. Take smartwatches that track your sleep stages and heart rate variability, apps that analyze your recovery, cold plunge tubs, red light therapy panels, and elaborate supplement stacks designed specifically for recovery. We over-engineer rest, pour money and attention and time into optimizing our recovery, follow detailed protocols designed by experts, and somehow still feel chronically exhausted in ways that do not show up on any metric our devices can measure. Vikings did precisely none of that, had access to none of those tools or technologies or insights, and operated with zero understanding of circadian biology or sleep architecture or hormonal rhythms. They rose naturally with the sun, no alarm clocks needed because the light itself woke them. They worked throughout the day using natural daylight that shifted with the seasons, and they slept when darkness fell because there was literally nothing else to do, and no artificial light to extend their active hours beyond what nature intended. There were no screens emitting blue light that suppresses melatonin production, no late-night scrolling through social media that keeps the brain activated when it should be winding down, no artificial stimulation from television or video games keeping them mentally wired at midnight when their bodies were begging for rest. Their bodies were physically spent in the most authentic way possible, not just mentally tired from decision fatigue and information overload, the way we get tired, but genuinely, completely exhausted from real physical work that had depleted their muscles and their energy systems and their nervous systems. So rest did not require optimization or special techniques or supplements. It came naturally and deeply because they had earned it through effort and their bodies knew exactly what to do with that opportunity to recover. They also embraced cold exposure, simply because it was unavoidable in the environment they lived in. They worked outside in freezing temperatures, and they plunged into cold water regularly because that is where fish were and boats needed to go. They were exposed to the elements constantly, without modern insulation or heating systems to protect them from discomfort. They did not optimize their rest days or plan deload weeks or track their recovery metrics. They just lived in rhythm with an environment that demanded tremendous output from them, and then by necessity created space for genuine rest, because pushing beyond what the body could handle meant failure at essential tasks, which meant serious consequences. In other words, recovery was simply the default state that emerged naturally when physical work was real and rest was genuine, and the two existed in proper balance. If Vikings built their strength through constant, real-world movement, fueled it with simple, unprocessed food, and recovered through natural rhythms, rather than engineered protocols, what exactly have we lost in our transition to modern life with all its convenience, technology, and optimization? More importantly, what has abandoning those principles actually cost us in terms of the strength and resilience we can develop? Somewhere along the path from their world to ours, in the shift from necessary physical work to optional gym sessions, we stopped building strength to support our lives and started building it to impress other people or to satisfy our own aesthetic goals. We chase numbers that live only in gym logbooks. We pursue physical appearances that look impressive in photographs. We chase the image of strength instead of pursuing strength itself as a functional capacity that serves us in real challenges. Our training routines are clean, controlled, and carefully curated. They are built around specific exercises performed in specific orders with specific rest periods. Everything is measured, tracked, and analyzed for continuous improvement. But real life, where strength actually needs to show up and perform, is not clean, controlled, or curated. It is messy, unpredictable, and chaotic. When things get genuinely difficult, when stress ambushes you, fatigue accumulates, and circumstances refuse to cooperate with your plans, all that carefully constructed gym strength often fades embarrassingly fast, revealing itself as more fragile than we would ever want to admit. Why does this happen with such depressing consistency? Because we train individual muscles in isolation, focusing on the chest one day and the back the next, ensuring each part gets optimal stimulus and recovery time. We train for the mirror, for the reflection that tells us whether our shoulders are bigger or our abs are more visible. We train for appearance rather than capability itself. We try to maximize results through scientific principles, evidence-based programming, and optimization of every variable we can measure. Here is the price of our approach, the cost we pay for all that sophistication and control. We develop strength that disappears under genuine pressure. It exists only when conditions are favorable, when we are fresh, and when everything is going according to plan. And in our obsessive pursuit of optimization, in our endless quest to find the perfect program, the ideal supplement stack, and the most efficient training split, we have completely abandoned the obvious truths that worked for thousands of years before we decided we could engineer something better. The Viking didn't ask how many calories he'd burned during his work, or whether he'd hit his protein target for the day, or whether his recovery metrics indicated he was ready for another hard session. He asked a much simpler and ultimately more important question. Can I carry this load another mile? Can I row for another hour? Can I keep going when everything in me wants to stop? That's a fundamentally different mindset, a different orientation toward what strength means and what it's for. But here's the genuinely good news that should give you hope, rather than making you feel like everything is lost. You don't need to row a longship across freezing fjords, or fight with axes, or abandon modern life entirely to reclaim the essential principles that made Viking strength work. You just need to change what you're training for, Shift your focus from optimization to adaptation, from appearance to function, from impressing others to building genuine capability. You don't need to quit your job, sell everything you own, move to a remote fjord in Scandinavia, or learn to fight with medieval weapons to train in a way that captures the essential principles that made Viking strength so durable and so real. But you absolutely do need to shift your fundamental mindset about what training is for and what strength actually means. Start with this foundational change. Stop organizing your training around body parts and muscle groups, and start organizing around output, around what your body can actually do in the real world, where tasks don't isolate individual muscles. Ditch the isolation exercises and instead embrace integration with movements that require your entire body to work as a coordinated system, the way it was designed to function. Pick up awkward objects that don't have handles in convenient places and that shift their weight as you move them. Carry substantial weight over real distance, not just across a gym floor, but outside, where the ground is uneven and the weather is uncomfortable, and you can't just stop when it gets hard. Pull things and drag things. Move resistance that fights back in ways machines never will. Train when it's cold outside and your body doesn't want to warm up properly. Train when you're already tired from the day's work, not recklessly in ways that lead to injury, but deliberately in ways that teach your nervous system to produce force under less than ideal conditions. Fuel yourself with real food that your great-great-grandparents would recognize as food. Not necessarily perfect food that hits every macro target. Not necessarily organic or grass-fed or locally sourced. Just real meat and fish and eggs and vegetables and fruits and grains. Things that grew or lived rather than being manufactured in facilities. Sleep with the lights completely off. Phone in another room where it can't tempt you or interrupt your rest with notifications. As close to true darkness as you can manage, because that's the environment your biology expects for quality sleep. If you want strength that holds up when life gets heavy, when circumstances turn difficult, when you can't control the environment, or the timing, or the specific challenge you're facing, this is where it starts. Not with finding the perfect program, but with changing your entire relationship to what training means. So the only question left, the one you have to answer for yourself because nobody can answer it for you, is simple but profound. Will you keep training for the mirror, for the numbers, for the appearance of strength that looks good but may not hold up when it matters most? Or will you start training for the moment, for the mission, for the kind of capability that your ancestors would have recognized as genuine strength?